In this video, we're going to learn how to create pivot tables as is required in your assignment 2. Before we start creating the pivot tables though, it's very important to understand the data. So first I downloaded some COVID data from ourworldindata.org/coronavirus. They have lots of charts and some very great downloadable data that you can just use to create your own charts and graphs. And I really didn't play with it very much. I deleted the world data, so we were really only dealing with countries. I added the continent. I looked up the ISO code and used a VLOOKUP to add the continent, but you don't have to worry about that. It's all in as data right now. And notice it shows the date. It shows cases and deaths, cases per million, deaths per million, and tests. I'm trying to stay away from deaths, so I'm pretty much working on the cases data. So now we can see with the cases, the total cases is cumulative, the new cases is by date. So notice that 2 plus the 2 equals 4, then the 4 plus the 8 equals 12, and then 12 plus 5 equals 17, 17 plus 2 equals 19. That's going to be important later when we build the pivot tables. And this is actually quite large. If we scroll down to the bottom, we can see that we have over 15,000 rows of data on COVID about cases and deaths. So let's look at the first pivot table that we're going to build. The first one I'm going to build is I'm just going to summarize the total cases by continent. So in order to create a pivot table, I just want to click any cell within the list. It doesn't matter which one, as long as it's within the list. And I'm going to click the Insert tab. And all the way to the left we have Pivot Table. Don't confuse Pivot Table with Table. They're very different. Make sure that you choose Pivot Table. So now I'm going to select Pivot Table and ask for the range. Notice it selected the range, and notice it goes down to row 15,000. You could edit that range yourself, but it's not necessary because Excel selected it. Now it wants where you want the pivot table to be placed, either in a new worksheet or an existing worksheet. If you want it in an existing worksheet, you'd have to click this radio button, click within this location box, and then click a cell somewhere within the sheet. But I like to have pivot tables on a new worksheet. You'll see me do this all the time because I find it a much cleaner way to create a pivot table away from the data. We're not going to work with the data model, but the data model allows us to combine several pivot tables into one. So now we're just going to select the table or range and the new worksheet and click OK. So now I want to summarize by continent. I want to summarize the total cases by continent. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take continent and I'm going to drag it into the row area. So notice when I drag continent into the row area, it becomes a row label. If I want it as a column label, I could drag it into the column area and we can see how this looks. But I think this is going to be better in this case in the row area. But once again, notice how easy it is to change the layout of a pivot table. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put the new cases, because the sum of the new cases is going to be the total cases. So I'm just going to drag the field new cases into the sigma values area, and now I can very easily summarize how many new cases there are over the time period in each of the different continents. If you want the numbers to have the commas, just select all the numbers, click the Home tab, click the comma style icon, and then go 2 icons to the right and click Decrease Decimal once and then twice. And we have a nice little pivot table over here which summarizes the new cases. You could even change the row labels. So instead of row label, I could type the word continent. And instead of sum of new cases, I could write total cases, 1, 1, 2, 5, 6. And double click between B and C, the column header, so that I could see the total title. And now I have a very nice pivot table. Now, let's say I wanted to add deaths to the pivot table. So all I have to do is click any cell within the pivot table. The pivot table fields come up automatically. If they don't, all you have to do is making sure that your active cell is a cell within the pivot table. Click the Analyze tab and make sure all the way on the right in the Show group that Field List is selected. So now I could drag new deaths into the sigma values next to the total cases. So right underneath total cases, drag it into the sigma values area. And I could change that title as well. Total deaths 1, 1, 2, 5, 6. And now once again we have a very, very nice pivot table. Although I just really want to focus on the total cases for my pivot tables. Now we're going to move on. So one of the nice things about pivot tables is you put it on a new sheet, it doesn't change your original data. So before we move on, I'm going to change the name of sheet 1, and I will call this by continent. Now I'm going to click the COVID raw data worksheet tab, and now I'm going to create another pivot table which is going to allow me to show the total cases by country but enable me to filter by continent. So I'm going to click any cell. It doesn't matter whether it's a word cell or a number cell as long as it's within the list. And I'm going to click Insert, and once again all the way to the left make sure it says Pivot Table. Table is something different. We're going to click Pivot Table, and it has the correct range. And as you know, I always like doing it on a new worksheet. I find it very much less cluttered than putting it on the same worksheet. And I'm going to click OK. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag location, which is actually country. I was going to change the field name to country, but not everyone is a country. So I'm going to drag location into the row area. I'm going to drag new cases into the sigma values. Notice it automatically comes up as sum, so it sums up all of the different dates in the range for each country. I'll show you another way that we could do the new cases in a moment. So I have the sum of new cases, but now what I'm going to use is I'm going to use this filters area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll up in the field list, and I'm going to drag continent into the filter area. So notice above my pivot table I get an extra row that says continent and all. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the down arrow, and instead of all I'm going to choose North America, and I'm going to click OK. So now I only have the countries in North America. I can change that. I can click the down arrow, and now instead of showing North America I can only show Oceania, and click OK, and I'm able to filter my list very easily. Or if I want, I can show Europe. Within each list as well you can sort it. So if I wanted to show Europe with the highest number of cases first and the lowest number last, all I have to do is click any number in sum of new cases, click the Data tab, and then in the Sort and Filter group, click the Z to A, sort largest to smallest. So I have to make sure that a cell that I want to sort by, because if I have column A, I would just sort in alphabetical order. But if I click a cell in column B, I'm going to sort numerical order by the new cases. So I'm just going to click the Sort Largest to Smallest, And we can see that Spain starts off with the highest number of cases, then followed by Italy and the United Kingdom. And once again, if you'd like to see those numbers with commas, just click the gray B column header, click your Home tab, comma style icon, and then 2 buttons to the right, decrease decimal once, and decrease decimal twice. So that's how we can create a pivot table that filters by the different continents. Now before I move on, I'm going to rename this sheet Countries by Continent. And now I'm going to use a pivot table to create a timeline. So I'm going to go back to the COVID raw data sheet, make sure that one of the lists in the cell is active. Again, it doesn't matter which one, it could be a date, a number, or a title, and click Insert, and then all the way to the left, Pivot Table. So I'm going to accept the defaults for the table or range and for the new worksheet, and click OK. Now this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag date into the row area, I'm going to drag location into the column area, and I'm going to drag new cases into the sigma values area. So now what I'm doing is I'm viewing the daily cases for each country for the time period. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert one filter, but I'm also going to insert a slicer. So making sure that I'm on the Analyze tab, notice how I have all sorts of actions for my pivot table. In the Filter group, I'm going to insert a slicer. So it's going to ask me what slicer I want. I can do a slicer for continent, which does basically the same thing as the filter, but I'm going to put in a slicer for the date, and then click OK. Now what I've noticed with the data is that very few countries have very few cases before March 1st. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down my slicer until I see the date for March 1st. So I'm going to click March 1st. Notice I only get March 1st. Now I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and I'm going to use the scroll bar to scroll down to the end of the slicer. And now, still holding down my Control key, I'm going to click May 6th. So notice now I have all the dates from March 1st to May 6th kind of filtered. Now I'm going to click back within my pivot table. I get my pivot table fields again. If you don't see the pivot table fields, all you have to do is click the Analyze tab, and in that Show Group, make sure that Field List is clicked. Now the last thing that I want to do is, even with this filtered by date, there are a lot of countries in the world. If we scroll all the way out, we see here we go all the way out to column HC, which is a very, very wide table. So what I want to do is I want to be able to filter by continent. So I could do that by inserting another slicer, but I can also very easily do it with the filter area. So I'm going to drag continent into the filter area, and I'm going to choose one of the smaller ones. So I'm going to go up in by cell A1 and cells B1 where I have my filter for the continent, and where it says all in cell B1, I'm going to click the down arrow, and I'm just going to choose Oceania and click OK. Now this is pretty neat because from the chart that we just prepared, making sure that you're on the Analyze tab and that one of the cells in the pivot table that you just created is active. I'm going to click Pivot Chart, and what I'm going to do is, instead of a column chart, I'm going to choose a line chart, and I am going to click OK. And look at that great line chart that we were able to create from the data for all of the countries in Oceania, what the new cases per day are from March 1st all the way out to May 6th. Now I am going to rename Sheet 3 Timeline. And now we're going to use one of Excel's newer features and create a map chart. So for the last time, I'm going to go back to the COVID raw data, and I'm just going to create a pivot table that has the total cases by country. So I'm going to make sure that any cell within the list is active, click Insert, and then Pivot Table. I'm going to accept all of the defaults for the table and range and the new worksheet and click OK. And this time I'm going to drag location into the row area and new cases into the sigma values area. Now I did want to show you another way that we can do the new cases. So another way that we can do the new cases is, I'm going to drag the new cases. What I can do is I can drag total cases instead into the sigma values area. But what happens is it's very inflated, because when I use total cases, we have day 1, and then we add that to day 1 plus day 2, and then we add that to day 1 plus day 2 plus day 3. So the early days are triple, quadruple, quintuple, and more counted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag date into that filter area. So instead of having a sum from all the dates, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the down arrow next to all, and I'm only going to choose 5/6, which is the grand total, which is the cumulative total of all of the cases. So I'm just going to choose May 6th and click OK, and I should have exactly the same number as what I did before for the total sum of the new cases. So either way you do it is going to be perfectly acceptable. Now we're going to create a map chart, but unfortunately you cannot create a map chart from a pivot chart. So I'm going to click Afghanistan, cell A4, and I'm going to select all the data without the headers or the grand total. So I'm going to select the range A4 down to B211. And now I'm going to go to my Home tab and hit the copy icon. If you want, you could right click and choose copy as well, but I just use the icon. Now I'm just going to click randomly. I'm going to leave a couple of columns blank to make sure my new data doesn't get mixed up with my old data. So I'm going to click cell E1, and I'm going to show you a little trick. Instead of clicking the paste icon, I'm going to click the down arrow, and I'm going to go to the second row, the one in the middle, that has me keeping the source column widths, so if my column widths are just where I want them, I don't have to change them. So now I've copied and pasted, and this second table is not within a pivot table, and it's already selected. So without deselecting it, if you do deselect it, just select it again. I'm going to click Insert, and in my chart area, I'm going to click Maps. If you have an older version of Excel, you may not have the maps. If you don't have it, then you can't follow along with this part of the lecture. So I'm going to click Maps, and then I'm just going to click Filled Map. And we have a nice little map right over here, which shows us all of the cases. So now notice when I hover over a particular country, it shows me what country it is and also what value it is from the list. And making sure that I'm on that Design tab, I can click Add Chart Element and then Data Labels and Show. And every country that's large enough, this is on my laptop so my monitor isn't very large, but we can see for some of the countries we can actually see the numbers. And if you'd like to see the commas and the numbers, all I'm going to do is select the gray F, the F column header, and I'm going to click that comma icon on the Home tab, making sure I'm on the Home tab. Click the comma icon, and then 2 to the right, decrease decimal once, and then twice, and now you can see the numbers with the commas. I can make my chart a little bit bigger so you can see as much as possible, and now I have a very nice map chart.